So, Gordon, thank you very much for taking the time to talk to me today. We're living in times that are where events are very much related to what we're going to be talking about today. Every day we see more new issues arise in terms of democracy, in terms of foreign affairs, and the impact that technology is having there. So, I think our discussion is going to be very, very interesting. To get us started, your background, you've done a number of things. You've been a journalist, you've dealt with political risk, you work for a think tank now, you also teach. But all of these things have combined, I guess, the fields of technology and politics. So I'd just like to ask you to say a little bit about how your career led you to this point.
Yeah, thank you, Peter. And it's a real pleasure to be here. I think the through line for technology in my career began when I was in graduate school. So in 2014 to 16. And I began to see, this was the time when we really started to see the impacts of social media on democratic processes and how changes in the information and communications environment we're having all these downstream effects on democracy, on civic engagement. Um, we see it. It there was this path, when I was first coming into the career world, where social media was seen as an unalloyed good, especially in international politics. If you remember the Arab Spring uprising, Twitter, Facebook, these were the main tools of communication among activists and protesters. And this was seen as a way to really democratize information and a way to, overthrow authoritarian governments and support democracy. That then turned, with the 2016 election in the United States and with Brexit, and we began to realize that nefarious actors and authoritarian states were getting a handle on these new tools and starting to use them in ways that were harmful to democracy and that were supporting state repression and state control. And I think that promise of the internet and democratized communications has really faced challenges. And we're now in an era where I don't think people are enthusiastic about new big tech tools and new ways of communication. I think that there is something large and historical going on here where we've had past eras where a new communications technology arrives and it completely upends the way that we share information with each other. The printing press, radio, the internet was one of these, and then social media is an enhancement on the internet, and then AI is going to be an enhancement on that in the same direction. But whenever we get these new technologies, we get really big disruptions in our society as we figure out how to manage them and how to use them. And I think a lot of the impacts that we're seeing in a lot of the backsliding in democracy, a lot of the deterioration in civic engagement and in social relations, um, even the turn towards authoritarianism that we're seeing around the world. I think a lot of this is downstream of the change in how we consume information and how we communicate with each other. And so to answer your question, like that is why tech became a prominent focus for me and an increasingly prominent focus in the work that I've done since.
Very interesting. And to follow from that, the impact that technology is having now, especially perhaps with, or increasingly with artificial intelligence, as far as democracy is concerned, is something that you've briefly referred to in your introduction. Could you talk a little bit more about the impact that technology is having on democracy? What you see as perhaps what the most important questions there may be?
So I think one of the necessary conditions for having a functioning democracy is that you have a shared understanding of the facts in society. And we've had a fracturing of the media environment such that in most societies we do not have that shared baseline of truth that we used to have. Again, that was never perfect, and there were lots of issues with, well, okay, who gets to control the truth? Back in the United States, there were three major news networks, and there was the Washington Post and the New York Times, and they got to be the arbiters of truth. And there are problems with that, but it was a we did have a shared view of like what the facts were, and there wasn't a lot of disagreement about what the actual truth was. Whereas now we're in the age of alternative facts. And so if you don't have that shared understanding of what is actually true, it's very hard to have productive discussions about where we should go as a society and what policies we should implement and what we should choose. So I think this is the biggest harm for democracy, the biggest threat for political processes. And then the thing that AI is adding on to this is it's becoming harder and harder to discern what is actually true on social media and in the news. Deep fakes are getting very, very good, and I don't think there are good solutions that we have being mainstreamed yet that can help someone distinguish fact from fiction. And given the laws of virality and how quickly things spread, it you it's hard to reinforce what the truth is after the thing is out already in the wild. There was a really kind of a bellwether event that happened in 2023 in Slovakia. There was a parliamentary election, and a few days, the two candidates were very close in the polls, but the quote unquote establishment candidate was leading. A few days before the election, a recording went viral that purportedly was of that leading candidate discussing a bribe that he was receiving. There happened to be a media blackout period of 2 days right before the election. And so there wasn't an opportunity for him to rebut the claims via traditional media. So the claim went viral, and it's unclear whether it was the thing that tilted the election, but the anti-establishment candidate ended up winning, and that probably played a factor in it. So we're already in an era where deepfakes and disinformation can sway political processes. And I don't think we have the tools yet to handle this.
Absolutely. And in the course that this interview is going to be used for, the students debate a range of topics in which technology is having an impact in society. And as part of what they do, we emphasize the use of evidence and the quality of that evidence in the arguments that they make in their discussions, which is impacted by what you have just described. Finding evidence that is reliable and trustworthy, being able to identify that is such an important skill, I think, for all of us today in understanding the world and determining how we'll act individually and collectively as governments and other bodies. You've written about something that you've called the AI power gap. And this I thought was very interesting because you argued that there were important consequences for that for smaller states and the global south. And I think this brings us into a discussion on the impact of technology on the relationship between nations. And here you're considering particularly the role of AI. So can I ask you, first of all, tell me what the AI power gap is, what you mean by this, and why you think it has these consequences for smaller and perhaps poorer countries?
So it's simply the observation that there is in AI a huge concentration in high income countries, in both the development of AI, the deployment of AI, and the governance of AI. So the United States, China, and some countries in Europe have a preponderance of the data, the compute infrastructure, the investment into frontier AI. And it's not only in the creation of the technology itself, adoption of it is much higher in high income countries, and also governance. By that I mean the development of standards, the development of policies, the development of strategies that can have influence on shaping the trajectory of the technology. This is also very highly concentrated in global north countries. We did an analysis at my think tank in partnership with another think tank based in Brazil, where we looked at all the different AI policies and standards and principles that have been created around the world. I think the latest count we did was at the beginning of last year, and there were 734 different sets of principles, governance standards, policies, etc. And the disparity was gigantic between those that were developed in North America, Europe, and China versus Africa, Latin America, South Asia. So there is this big gap, and the consequences. I think there are really three big things. So one is just a question of access to cutting edge technology and the ability to use it for development. The development potential for AI is very large. I mean, the estimates about the total additions to GDP that might come from adoption of AI in society is very high. There's already a very large digital divide between the rich world and the developing world. Um, there's a big question as to whether countries that could use AI to leapfrog in development will be able to get access to it. So it matters for that. Two, if all of these models and tools are being developed in rich world jurisdictions, then there are biases and there are context specific things baked into that uh, that will then not suit a developing context well. So there's questions about alignment with the specific context that the tool is being deployed in. These especially matter in areas like public safety, where facial recognition tools and other predictive algorithms might be trained on the wrong data set and might not apply to one country or another. And then finally, something about large language models in particular is that there is a cultural context and a view of the world that is baked into them because they are developed from all this training data. If all that training data comes from the United States and from Europe and even from China, that contains a kind of epistemic point of view that some worry could lead to, cultural erasure in, different countries in the global South. So there's a threat that we push towards something of a monoculture with the adoption of these tools. And I don't think that this is inevitable. And I actually see a lot of countervailing trends that push against this. This is the creation of a lot of small language models, open models that can then be fine-tuned, and that additional data sets can be added into to train. So it's not a fait accompli by any sense, but I think this gap it's large, it's growing larger, and it will have some consequential consequences for the world.
Absolutely. But you've considered what to do about this. You have thought about how to democratize AI and the impact that it might have, how smaller states may participate in the governance of it more effectively. So I thought I would ask you about that. And in this context, the role of the UN and other international institutions, what they might be able to do. And I'm aware, of course, that the future of these international institutions has a degree of uncertainty about it at the moment too. Uh, but the but I was interested in your views on what can be done about the imbalance of power around AI.
So I think broadly speaking, there are two areas that need to be addressed. One is just the question of resources to help facilitate access to AI in the global south. This means access to compute infrastructure. It means access to representative data sets that especially in low resource jurisdictions, how can you help build those and develop those? And I think there's a movement that's growing around so-called public AI, which is to create shared infrastructure, create shared data sets using, in some cases, public resources or getting philanthropic investment, but then can be used by jurisdictions that are seeking to use AI in the public interest. There's been talk at the UN of creating a global fund in which countries could put in money that would help to create some of these resources in the global south, but I don't think those talks have gone anywhere. Funding is in short supply at the UN right now. So resources is one, and then the second is just participation. So all of these countries should have a seat at the table when governance is being designed for AI, and when the models are being developed. Also, there's some good organizations doing some great work on trying to facilitate those connections. And I know some of the big model developers like Anthropic and OpenAI are trying to gather more input from the different communities that will use their models for specific use cases. There's a civil society organization called the Collective Intelligence Project that does great work on facilitating global dialogues to help make the design and governance of AI more participatory. As to the question of what role international institutions are playing, so I think despite the attacks on the UN and US withdrawal from a lot of parts of the UN, it continues to be the most important global forum in which every nation in the world has a seat. So if you are a small nation, the UN is still a place you can go to have your voice heard. And there are two new institutions that the United Nations is bringing online this year. One is a scientific panel, kind of modeled off of the IPCC in climate change, that will try to create a shared picture of what is happening in AI and what the scientific state of it is that could be useful for all nations and could help inform governance. And second, there's something called the Global Dialogue on AI, which I think will be mostly a talking shop, but it will be an inclusive talking shop where every country can have a seat and then air their concerns about AI and learn more from it. So I think the UN will continue to be an essential place where AI governance and these conversations happen. But I also think that there should be a lot of what we might call mini lateralism or regional multilateralism, where you have the African Union, for instance, aligning on AI strategy and AI policy, which it is already doing. ASEAN and Southeast Asia doing the same. But there might also be arrangements that are not just regional, but where you have countries of similar size and similar development level working together to try and address some of the common challenges that they're facing with AI, to try and make a case for pooling AI resources on shared data sets, on shared infrastructure, et cetera, that might help them be greater than the sum of their parts by banding together.
Okay, so what you've described there is the actions that individual countries might take, and also how they may collaborate through international institutions to address the challenges that AI creates. But you've also talked about the role that states may play or the actions that states may take in relation to the private tech firms and their uh, and the democratic impact of them. So I was interested in your thoughts around that, the power of the big tech companies versus the individual nation states, especially perhaps smaller states. But I think there are questions about their relationship with all states today.
Yeah, I mean, we're living in a time where we have some of the most powerful corporations in the history of the world. I mean, the size and the reach of the big tech firms, so Google, Meta, Microsoft, Apple, are on par with anything we saw during the age of company states, when you had the Dutch East India Company and the East India Company that had monopolies over different important commodity trades around the world. And the analogy is imperfect because the company states of the past actually had standing armies and they had sovereignty over colonial possessions in different countries, and they would do things like massacre entire villages. Um, Certainly, like Meta and Google are not committing abuses like this, but there's a case to be made that the influence they have through their products um, is is almost unprecedented. The number of users, I mean, I think at last count, there were 3.5 to 4 billion monthly average users of Facebook products around the world. And these are not, uh, these are not, like material things, but it is shaping discourse in societies. It's shaping civic engagement. It's even shaping thought patterns of the people who use them. Some of the largest uptake of Facebook and Instagram are in developing countries, places like the Philippines and Sri Lanka and Bangladesh, et cetera. So there's all to say that I think the influence of these companies is very large. I think I mean, just in terms of market capitalization and revenues, they're absolutely massive. They have a lot of leverage over U.S. Policy, or to be more precise, they're able to shape U.S. policy both because when it comes to when it comes to the expression of technology in the world, they're kind of representing U.S. interests, and there is geopolitics that have become tied in with technology, vis-a-vis China and the imperative to win the AI race and to have more digital properties around the world and digital holdings. So this gives them a lot of leverage. But in a lot of places, the representatives for Google or Meta will have more influence than the U.S. ambassador to shape the digital policies of different countries. So this does raise large questions, I think, for both U.S. foreign policy and kind of how democratic it is, because these companies are private companies. Their interests are not the public interest. They are not the national interest. They pursue a set of private interests, profit and access to new markets. Those sometimes run counter to what the interests of the United States are, and there aren't proper democratic checks, on large corporations. I think bigger picture, we're kind of in an age where there's been a lot of privatization and private power has become immense. And at least in the West, there's been a diminishment of public power.
How, in terms of the capacity of nations, of their foreign affairs activities, of their governance, I guess, uh, how effectively are they uh, dealing with these, with the big tech companies and with the way the world is today? Are there areas where their capacity uh, may need to be strengthened? How effectively are countries dealing with this new situation, relatively new, I guess, of this presence of big tech power across the world?
So it's interesting in Silicon Valley now. I think there are around 50 different countries that have envoys placed in Silicon Valley whose job it is to interact and engage with the tech companies, as if the tech companies are kind of like sovereign powers in themselves, which is a very telling phenomenon.
Mm.
I think there are, I mean, I can speak from the US's perspective that the US still far short of where it needs to be in both digital literacy and kind of tech understanding. There has been a now, I mean, decades long decline in US diplomatic capacity, repeated cuts to the State Department. Um, Even before the Trump administration, there had been this large trend towards increasing securitization and increasing Defense Department expenditures, sacrificing, diplomatic budgets. So U.S. presence in the world has been more defined by, its military engagements than by its diplomatic engagements. Um, I think both there is a need to have more tech specific diplomatic capacity. So envoys who are specialists in technology, but also every diplomat needs to have an understanding of technology and of these issues because, as we've been discussing, they intersect with all the other issues in the policy portfolio. Technology is cross-cutting. It is changing very fast. And I think to engage in the world, there has to be a clear understanding of how technology is working and how it's applying in different contexts.
And so, I, my understanding is that you have used the term digital agency, which would refer partly to what you've just described, I would think, in terms of the capability of individual countries to address the challenges, I guess, of the growth of tech power. Presumably, that is what you mean by your concept of digital agency, the development of national capabilities to act as far as the big tech companies go, but perhaps also to develop their own capacity in the areas where it will benefit them to do this. Would that be the way you see this, or?
So for the idea of digital agency, I have to credit my colleague Akash Kapoor, who came up with this, and I worked on it a little bit with him, but he was the creator of this idea. And really, digital agency is a concept that he created in opposition to the idea of digital sovereignty. If you look at globally, the dominant trend across the world is this push for digital sovereignty as a reaction to the the imposition of technology from the big tech companies specifically. Digital sovereignty has gained a lot of purchase, not just in the developing world, but in Europe, um, all over. And it's basically the idea that we as a country need to have control over our data and over our own technological infrastructure in order to, safeguard our national sovereignty and not be a quote unquote like colonial holding of one of the big tech companies. The problem with that conception is that there are if you completely adhere to that and say we're going to be totally self-sufficient with technology, then you're going to miss out on technology. Very few jurisdictions are creating the cutting edge technology that will make you competitive and can help advance your economy, et cetera, et cetera. So digital agency was, I think, an attempt to try to come up with a concept that is more realistic and that is focused on both preserving the sovereignty and the agency of a country while also being realistic about the real limitations of what you're able to achieve technologically on your own. So it dovetails with an idea that another scholar named Pablo Chavez has come up with called hybrid sovereignty. And this is the idea that you need to have local ownership. So you need to have safeguards in place that protect your data, that give you control and visibility over it, that make sure that you're making as a country your decisions about your technological destiny. However, you also have international partnerships and collaborations. You're just playing a more active role in setting the terms of those so that you're not under the control of anything else. Um, so building on that, the idea behind digital agency is that you are able to have a collaborative relationship with the entire world, and to also be able to build local capacity and to exert agency in doing that. So the idea of having the promise of technology overall is that it makes us more collaborative and brings us into connection with each other. I think this digital sovereignty push has retreated from that vision as a reaction to the excesses we've seen in the spread of big tech and its influence on the world. So I think there's some recalibration that is in order. And if you want to benefit from technology, it really depends on having productive international collaborations and partnerships.
Yeah, which seems a very important point to make. But what you're saying is that a sovereignty approach could feature a high degree of isolationism, and you're arguing that that's not that would be negative, that that's not necessary if you can form collaborative relationships in which individual nations have a significant degree of control of their own destiny and their own the way technology may be used in and applied inside their countries.
I think that's right. I think that self-sufficiency is not the same as sovereignty.
Yes.
We rely on each other for all sorts of things, and we've done
Hmm.
so. It's the secret sauce of humanity. I mean, the ability to collectively organize and collaborate is what has enabled civilization. And to think that you can just be totally self-sufficient on your own, is just, very limiting. It'll cut off a lot of possibilities.
Yeah, this almost seems like a subset of the broader international trend towards isolationism, seen in the tech sphere. But at the same time, this is part of a wider debate on the relationship of countries with each other across the world and a more collaborative approach.
That's a good point, and it reflects the zero-sum thinking that we're seeing dominate
Yeah,
global politics in a lot of
yeah.
domains, which, to be fair, is built on very real grievances that went unaddressed for a long time.
Mm.
The push for digital sovereignty is coming out of what have been, abuses of technological relationships with countries, and the
Mm.
spread of platforms that have had horrific effects in different societies without the input of those countries and how those platforms are being used and shaped, etc. So there are real grievances that were addressed, but isolationism and zero-sum thinking is not the way to solve these challenges.
Yeah, very. This seems like a very important contribution to the debate. We are talking about digital sovereignty in Canada. It's a very, prominent topic in government discussions at the moment, and the concept of digital agency seems very important in that context. Okay, I did see that you had done some thinking or you had made some comments around the actions of individual countries and their models of digital governance. And I was keen to just ask you if there were countries that we should particularly look at as examples of good practice that we can learn from.
Yeah, some that I think are instructive. So Estonia has long been a model of not just how to build a digital state, but also how to use that capability to have greater global influence. So Estonia, since I think 2003, um, has digitized public services, data exchange. They have um, a very robust digital exchange platform, data exchange platform called X-Road. And then many other countries have adopted it. It's totally open source, and Estonia provides technical capacity for different countries to adopt that and use it. But Estonia has really kind of established itself as a example of a country that can use open technology in a way that is still very secure and protects its citizens. I mean, Estonia is under constant threat and pressure from its neighbor Russia, and there have been many cyber attacks on Estonia, and security is a really real concern. And they've been able to demonstrate that you can have open technology as the backbone of your society while still maintaining security. So I think they're a very interesting example. I think Singapore is another country that, especially in how they're approaching AI, um, kind of embodies some of these principles of collaboration that we were talking about, and some of these principles around supporting global South countries in building data sets and models. So there's a project called Sea Lion. It's a language model that has come out of Singapore that incorporates, I think, a dozen Southeast Asian languages. So it's a large language model that is trained on Southeast Asian languages. And so those epistemic questions and those cultural questions that arise in large language models, Singapore is helping to address those through this model. And they've also been, um, from what I understand, very collaborative in the communities that they're gathering training data from. Whereas the large model developers in the US have basically just taken what they've wanted and dealt with copyright lawsuits afterwards. The Singaporeans were they were in dialogue with some of the owners of the material that they wanted to train the language model on. I know they had a robust discussion with authors, Singaporean authors, about whether they could use their work, their copyrighted work, in training the model. So there's some principles there that have been good. And then India has really emerged as a leader in digital governance and this whole digital public infrastructure movement, it's called. So India created through a public private partnership, um, a society wide digital identity system, which is quite an amazing feat. 1.4 billion people have a digital ID in India now that enables them to access government services, land titles, all sorts of things that are important for development. On top of that, they built a payments layer. So anyone can plug into it and make instant payments for virtually free in India, whether you're a business to a business, whether you are a customer in a market buying some fruit from a vendor, there's just a code that you can plug in and instantly pay using your phone. So there's been a real revolution in payments infrastructure. And then another layer of data exchange, so documents and other vital services. They have led a movement to show how developing countries can adopt similar infrastructure so that is interoperable, open, that helps advance development outcomes, that is built on open standards and that has safeguards. Um, so this is a real demonstration also of the fact that um, you might expect that the rich world has all the governance answers for technology, but that's really not the case. You're seeing some of the most innovative thinking and approaches to governance coming out of countries that are in the global south.
And it's wonderful to see the examples that you've cited that give some hope about what the future may bring. I've got just two final questions, though. The first one is about the future and what you think uh, could happen. And the way I've crafted this is to consider what the possible scenarios might be as far as artificial intelligence and the international order may be. So, have you got thoughts on that? Perhaps a range of possibilities that we might see as far as the future is concerned?
I think there's definitely a range of possibilities. I mean, economists like to distinguish between risk and uncertainty. Risk is kind of better because you're able to price it. Uncertainty, you can't price and you can't really prepare for. It's just kind of uncertain what's going to happen. And I think with AI, there is a lot of that, both in what the actual technology will become, whether if you're spending time in Silicon Valley, you're hearing a lot about artificial general intelligence and this thing becoming a super intelligence and kind of a species, and then all bets are off. I think here I'm in New York on the US East Coast. There's more of a view that AI is going to be a normal technology, as Arvind Narayanan and Sayesh Kapoor at Princeton put it, where it'll be something like electricity, where it is transformational and has a huge impact on society, but it will roll out slowly and society will adapt to it. And there'll be this push and pull full of disruptions, but it's basically a normal technology like other technologies we've had before. And, I'm not enough of a technical expert or, brash enough to make predictions about where the technology will go. But what I think about the possibilities for what it does internationally is I do see, I am optimistic that its adoption across the world, especially small language models used for specific use cases in development, in public health, in making government processes like procurement more effective and more being able to be carried out with more fidelity. I think that is very promising. I think there's a lot of the adoption of it is going to bring a lot of good, or at least has the potential to bring a lot of good. But there's a lot about it that is very destabilizing. I think the stuff that we talked about related to what it does to the information environment can have real consequences. I think there are real risks around rogue actors being able to use the technology to develop biological weapons, other threats. I worry about the military implications of AI. You know how if one nation gains a really decisive advantage in it, what that could be. So I think when it comes to governance, that we need to think on kind of two dimensions. Like one, you don't want to overly restrict the spread of this technology at the local level and for simple use cases, but there need to be some high level agreements related to military use, related to some of the dangerous use cases around bioweapons and terrorism that could come out of it. But I am optimistic that we can create some collaborative agreements and work together to steer the direction of the technology in a positive way.
I hope so too. The final question is very simply the people who have been watching this may have been tremendously excited by hearing you talk and may be inspired to move into a career in technology and foreign policy, technology, and its impact on politics. For people who may be considering this, uh, do you have any advice that you would like to give them? Something that might help them along their path?
So I just started reading this book by the science journalist David Epstein called Range: Why Generalists Triumph in a Specialized World. And in our society, we have this really strong bias towards specialization, that you should really become just a specialized expert in your particular field and your particular niche. But he's pointing out that actually the most, kind of successful people end up sampling a lot of different careers and interests and pursuits before settling on whatever their particular field is. So this is partially my own bias. I mean, this reinforces my own views because I have sampled a lot of um, different. I've been in the private sector, the public sector. I've worked at a tech company. I've worked in journalism. I'm now at a think tank. I've had a little bit of experience in government. So I have kind of sampled a lot. But I think it is really true that it's important to gain some experience in different sectors to see how those sectors talk about the technology, how they're thinking about it, what it looks like from their view. Um, Same for governments, how governments are thinking about it, how the civil society is thinking about it. So I'm just an advocate for sampling, for trying things on, and gaining kind of a broad view and a broad set of experiences.
Yeah, I guess it reflects my view that a solid career foundation with that diversity is something that's good for young people to do today in a world that is changing so rapidly and where the ability to adapt is going to be very important. Your advice, I think, in your answer to that question, but also the knowledge that you've shared in your answers to all of the questions, I think is going to be really valuable to the people who are watching. And I'm grateful to you for taking the time to do this today, Gordon.
Thank you very much, Peter. I will say to everyone that you're fortunate to have a professor like Peter who is encouraging this kind of broad-based thinking. And it was just a pleasure to do this. Thank you.